Aita for deciding to divorce my wife after she humiliated me on Father's Day. My wife neglects our children and humiliated me on Father's Day. After much consideration, I've decided to proceed with a divorce. I am 43 years old and have tried my best to provide for my 38-year-old wife and our 2 children aged 3 and 5. In addition to caring for my mother-in-law, I like to think I've done a decent job. Over the years I've worked to improve our family's living situation. Not only did I finish another university degree and recently complete a master's in a stimulated field, I also worked 2 full-time jobs while finishing my second degree and supported my wife in her studies. She completed a degree that allows her to earn a good salary of $60,000 to $70,000 annually in a health-related field with stable job availability. However, with the birth of our 2 children, she decided to leave her career temporarily to be a stay-at-home mom. At first it was challenging as I was finishing my master's degree. Once I completed it, and after our youngest turned 3, my career took off. We are now able to live more comfortably on a single income. We're not wealthy. We're doing well for a family of 4 on a little over $50,000 a year plus bonuses. This past year has been overwhelming for my wife. Even though I now work 75% from home, I budgeted for a daytime nanny to help her with one of the children while the other attends school daily. My day starts around 5:30 or 6 a.m. Prepare the house for the day before the nanny arrives at 8 a.m. I wake our eldest child, them ready for school, make breakfast, plan my day, take them to school and return home to greet the nanny. My current work assignment keeps me home 100% of the time for the next 2 months, which is nice, though I'm busy with meetings all day since my role involves managing global teams and overseeing industry projects over the past month and a half. I've noticed that despite my wife claiming her life at home is stressful, her day starts at 10 a.m. After a week of working from home, I asked my mother-in-law and the nanny if this was typical, and both said it varies, sometimes earlier, sometimes later. My wife literally wakes up, cooks, and then spends her time browsing her phone or shopping online. This leads to my concern. I'm glad I can give her this lifestyle since we both grew up with limited means. I understand the possibility of postpartum depression, the stress of having children, feelings of unfulfillment, and the fact that I may not be the best husband, but for what it's worth, everything is covered. And then some. I handle the household finances because she said she was too busy to do it. I pay all the household bills, cover my personal expenses, pay her bills, manage and oversee all the maintenance of our home, cars and pets, even help pay for my mother-in-law's medical bills in her car. Yet, apparently my life is much easier compared to hers. I can't relax around her because she always feels the need to one-up me. If I have a bad day, she insists hers was worse because I'm lucky to leave the house for work. If my feet hurt from walking all day during a work trip, she says it's nothing compared to standing and cooking with a child clinging to her. For the past 2 years I've heard that I've ruined her life and opportunities, but when I remind her of this, she denies it and avoids accountability. My mother-in-law has noticed a change in both me and my wife, pointing out that I've become more attached to my kids and even hug and talk to the dogs about my life more than I do to my wife. Honestly, feel like I'm in emotional survival mode. I'm 1 step away from a career promotion and 1 step away from finding comfort and love at the bottom of a whiskey bottle. I'm sure I'll hear from the tough guys on Reddit about how I'm complaining, but I'm not a machine. I just want to know and feel that someone I prioritize other than my kids appreciates and values what I do. I'm sure I'll also hear from stay-at-home moms, which is fine. I grew up in a single-parent home, and I know it's not easy, honestly, with her mother's help and a weekday nanny for a toddler while the other child is in school. Can you honestly tell me she's living the typical stay-at-home mom experience? None of my friends or colleagues who were single parents could say she is. To summarize, I feel that my wife has disconnected from our marriage. We are just roommates where she still gets to reap the benefits of marriage. I'm not asking her to be on top of me all the time or let me do whatever I want. I really just want her to tell me that I'm doing a good job and give me some emotional comfort. Something as simple as a hug, but I guess the man who ruined her life, I deserve this. I'm not sure if anyone will read this, but thank you to those who have reached out. I've kept my new friends here updated, so I thought I'd share an update and keep it brief. I showed my wife this post the following weekend. She read it along with all the comments summarizing. We had a discussion. She left the house to stay with her sister. And since then I've been a single parent. It's sad to say, but aside from the good night routines with our children, it's practically the same routine as before. There's not much more to say except to thank everyone for their kind words of support. I just need to add that this post grew larger than I expected, as it was initially just a venting post. But I've responded to some comments regardless. Thank you for the feedback and direct messages, and even more for the offers to let me ruin your lives, as someone jokingly put it. It's been the highlight of my days and nights as I sit here sipping a drink with my dog while everyone else sleeps. It feels depressing that I have to resort to strangers on the internet for some form of validation in my venting. My apologies in advance as I try to keep this as vague as possible. I just wanted to update those who have been kind enough to ask in DMs and comments. Another update. It's ironic and a coincidence that I'm writing an update during Men's Mental Health Awareness Month. I could really use another outlet aside from my therapist. My apologies if this isn't the storybook tale of a relationship falling apart that some might expect. To summarize, my wife left and came back as if nothing had happened. She made it about herself and nothing changed. I continue to suffer mentally knowing that nothing will change. While I try to hold it together for the sake of our children, the day after she packed up and left, my wife tried to return and take the kids with her to her sister's house. Naturally, I objected. Unfortunately, her entire family, including her sister, also opposed it. Not only was it unfair to our children that was not their home, but it would also impose financial and housing burdens on the rest of her family since my wife doesn't work. Her sister's family, including her husband and 3 children, lives in her father's house. After just over a week, I suppose she calmed down and decided it was enough to simply walk back into the house with her bags as if she had just returned from a trip to the supermarket. She walked into my office while I was working and glared at me angrily while I was on a conference call with my team. I couldn't skip the call since it's a busy time of the quarter for us. I suppose that didn't sit well with her. Once I removed my headphones and closed my laptop, she started yelling at me about how much I don't care about her overall well-being at that moment. Couldn't do anything but look at her and shake my head. My mother-in-law walked in after hearing my wife's yelling and pulled her away, telling her not to bother me, while the nanny kept our youngest child away from it all on the other side of the house. That night, after putting the kids to bed, I stayed in my office alone with a drink. As I've been doing for the past few nights, my wife came in, we talked, argued, cried, and drank. One thing led to another and we ended up in bed. I wish I could say that was our reconciliation. But the next morning, while we were still in bed, she started talking about how difficult it had been for her during the time she was away. She spoke about her struggles staying in her family's home in her old room with her father and her sister's family. How lucky I am to be able to stay here and do this and that, not stressing as much as they do. Even though we both had similar upbringing, my mind and heart broke that morning. Since then, I've been in an emotional downward spiral. Last week, I tried once again to reconcile and talk about things, but it turned into a shouting match as I tried to express my current concerns and anxieties about life and work in general. I said, "What about my happiness, stress, needs, and overall well-being?" Her response, "We all have our own problems. You need to suck it up and get over it." I don't know who the woman in my home is, but she's not the same person I married and vowed to spend the rest of my life with, raising our children together. Since that conversation, I've been notably distant from her, sleeping in my office on the couch, or in my kids' beds after putting them to sleep. Nothing has changed in her routine. She still starts her day at 10 a.m., spends time on her phone chatting with mom groups, and cooks meals while the kids are under the care of my mother-in-law and the nanny. Unfortunately, I don't think even a divorce would change much or make a big difference. During her absence, my days felt like any other day, just with a bit more takeout than usual. First update. Thank you for all the comments and direct messages. Here's some additional context, since my original post was filled with emotions following another argument. After the births of our children, their doctors gave my wife postpartum depression screening forms, and on both occasions her scores were quite high. It was suggested that she see a therapist, and with our second child her scores were even higher. I did everything I could to get her the help she needed, but she refused. We brought in my mother-in-law and hired a nanny as support. I know what some people will say, but this is one of the reasons I'm not 100% ready to give up and throw our life together away. I also know that suffering in silence won't create a healthy environment for our children's future, but neither would a hateful and bitter divorce. I've mentioned to a few people, I've spoken to via private messages, that I have multiple contingency plans in case the situation deteriorates further. I've spoken to 3 lawyers, know our rights, and have a provisional divorce agreement. Ready? If the time comes, I'm willing to offer more than my fair share for the well-being of our children. But I'm also prepared to go to court if necessary. It's entirely my decision to endure all of this in silence, but I'm too stubborn to completely give up. I still hold on to hope that my wife will finally agree to therapy, and that we can work through this together. New update. I'm ready. My wife humiliated me in front of the therapist and our family at the Father's Day dinner. She acted as though everything was fine and perfect while I take care of my family, or kids, my mother and my mother-in-law. Now, I'm simply waiting for the divorce process. Clarify. I didn't earn 2 bachelor's degrees and a master's degree while working 2 jobs simultaneously. As some readers have assumed, my first bachelor's degree was completed in the early 2000s. The second was completed online over several years, taking only 2 classes per semester while I had 2 jobs. After finishing the second degree and entering the industry I currently work in, I transitioned to a single job and pursued my master's degree. So no, I didn't complete all three at the same time. Technically my wife has a job, but she barely works, so much so that we forget she even has it. She worked a single day in 5 months, an 8-hour shift on a Tuesday. She has the option to work more if she wants to, but chooses not to. Both our family, her employer. I have made multiple efforts to encourage her to return to work, even with the support of the nanny and my mother-in-law, as well as my ability to work from home. Yet here we are. On my end, I've already been in therapy. My job can be very challenging for my mental and physical health. So, lacking support at home, I opted for therapy instead of seeking comfort elsewhere or at the bottom of a bottle. I've tried expressing this to my wife, but as I mentioned in my previous post, she tends to compete with my struggles. And here we are. My mother-in-law lives with us and helps, especially as she undergoes medical treatments. According to several screening questionnaires, my wife is highly likely to have postpartum depression. In addition to a history of symptoms of OCD and other issues, for which she has refused treatment, I knew what I was getting into when I married her and accepted my wife with her flaws, just as she accepted mine. Thank you to everyone who has commented and reached out. I've met many strangers on Reddit who have become great pen pals and have stayed informed every step of this process. I'm surprised at how far this story has gone, from other suburbs to other platforms and even YouTube. Whether you hate me, love me, or think this is fake, thank you for all the constructive comments and direct messages checking in on how my kids and I are doing. We'll be okay moving forward. Final update. After a family intervention, we finally agreed to go to couples therapy. I'm sure many can guess how that turned out. Blame, tears, guilt, gaslighting, and everything falling back on how I am the cause of her problems. This all happened in front of a licensed therapist, not just Reddit or her mom groups. In the end, everything the therapist suggested and noted was ignored because it didn't align with her perspective. Thank you for following this story and for all the advice and support.